My parents planned a trip for me without telling me why. I found out. When my parents told me they had planned a trip for me, my first reaction was confusion, not excitement. They were never the surprise type. Everything in our family was discussed, debated, and usually argued to death before any decision was made. So when my mom casually mentioned over the phone that they had already booked flights and accommodations for me, my stomach tightened instead of fluttering. She said it like it was no big deal, like she was telling me she'd bought extra groceries. "We leave in 3 weeks," she added, as if that settled it. I asked where we were going. She named the city. I asked why. She laughed lightly and said, "You'll see. It'll be good for you." That phrase alone should have been my warning. Growing up, "it'll be good for you" usually meant someone else had decided what was best for me without bothering to ask. It meant compromise, pressure, and expectations disguised as concern. But I didn't push back right away. I was tired. I had been juggling work stress, family obligations, and a general sense that I was always falling short of something invisible. So I said, "Okay." The first red flag came when I realized how detailed the plans were. They hadn't just booked a hotel. They had an itinerary, appointments, scheduled dinners, time blocks that were suspiciously specific. It felt less like a vacation and more like a program. Every time I asked for clarification, I got vague answers. "It's just a change of scenery." "You've been stuck in a rut." "We want you to reconnect with family." That last one stood out. Reconnect with which family, exactly? We weren't particularly close to anyone in that city anymore. Most of our extended relatives had moved years ago. When I pointed that out, my dad brushed it off and said, "You'd be surprised who's still around." I tried to convince myself I was overthinking it. As the departure date got closer, their behavior shifted. They became unusually attentive. Too attentive. My mom started calling daily, asking about my sleep, my job, my mood. My dad kept offering unsolicited advice about life decisions I hadn't mentioned in years. They weren't checking in, they were assessing. The night before the trip, I barely slept. Something felt off in a way I couldn't articulate. It was the same feeling I'd had as a kid when I'd be told to dress nicely without being told where we were going. The flight itself was uneventful, but the tension followed us like a shadow. They were cheerful in a performative way, overly polite, like coworkers pretending everything was fine during a meeting that everyone knew was about layoffs. When we arrived, I noticed the hotel wasn't downtown, where tourists usually stayed. It was closer to a quieter residential area. Again, when I asked why, my mom smiled and said, "It's just more convenient." Convenient for what? She didn't say. The next morning, my dad announced we had breakfast plans with someone, a family friend. He said the name casually, but it hit me like a punch. I hadn't heard that name in years. It belonged to someone who had once been deeply involved in my life in a way that ended badly and painfully. I asked why we were seeing them. My parents exchanged a look. "It's just catching up," my mom said. "No pressure." But everything about the situation felt like pressure. At breakfast, it became clear this wasn't a coincidence. The conversation kept circling back to my life choices, my career, my relationships, my independence. Subtle critiques dressed up as concern, carefully worded questions that felt rehearsed. Then came the comments about stability, about settling down, about making smarter decisions. I stayed quiet, answering politely but minimally, watching as the pieces started to come together in my head. This trip wasn't for me. It was about me. Later that day, my parents insisted we visit a house in a nearby neighborhood. They framed it as sightseeing, but the moment we pulled up, I recognized it. I had been there before, years ago, during a period of my life I had worked hard to move past. That was when the truth started to crack through the surface. Inside the house were more familiar faces, people from my past, people I had deliberately distanced myself from, people my parents had stayed in touch with long after I'd asked them not to. The room buzzed with awkward energy, smiles that didn't reach eyes, hugs that lingered too long, compliments that felt loaded. Finally, someone said it out loud. "We're just worried about you." There it was. They weren't worried, they were dissatisfied. As the evening unfolded, it became painfully obvious what this trip really was. An intervention, disguised as a vacation. A coordinated effort to steer my life back onto a path they approved of. Career suggestions I had explicitly rejected before. Relationship advice rooted in outdated expectations. Even subtle hints about reconnecting romantically with someone I had no interest in revisiting. My parents watched closely, like referees, waiting to see how I'd react. I felt humiliated. Not because of what they were saying, but because of how little they trusted me. They had planned this entire trip without telling me the real reason because they knew I wouldn't have agreed. They had decided that manipulation was easier than conversation. That night, back at the hotel, I finally confronted them. I asked them directly why they hadn't been honest. My mom cried immediately. My dad got defensive. They said they were just trying to help, that they felt I was drifting, that they were afraid I'd regret my choices someday. I asked them if they trusted me. They didn't answer right away. That silence told me everything. The next day was supposed to be the big day. A lunch with more people, more advice, more pressure. I didn't go. Instead, I packed my bags. When my parents realized what I was doing, panic set in. They accused me of being dramatic, ungrateful. They said I was overreacting, that they'd spent so much money on this trip that everyone just wanted the best for me. I told them calmly that the best thing for me would have been honesty. I left early, changed my flight, paid the fee myself. On the plane ride home, I felt a mix of grief and relief. Grief for the relationship I thought I had with my parents. Relief that I had finally seen the truth clearly. The aftermath was messy. My parents alternated between apologizing and justifying themselves. They insisted their intentions were good, that they were just scared, that they didn't mean to hurt me. But intent doesn't erase impact. What hurt most wasn't the trip itself. It was realizing how long they had been discussing my life without me. How many conversations had happened behind closed doors. How many decisions they felt entitled to make on my behalf. In the weeks that followed, I set boundaries I should have set years ago. Hard ones, uncomfortable ones. Some were respected, others were not. Our relationship hasn't been the same since. It's quieter, more distant, more honest, in a way that still aches. But here's what changed for me. I stopped second-guessing myself. I stopped wondering if I was selfish for wanting autonomy. I stopped feeling guilty for not living a life that made other people comfortable. That trip wasn't a gift. It was a wake-up call. Not the one my parents intended. It showed me that love without respect is just control with better branding. That concern without trust is just fear passed down like an heirloom. And that sometimes the hardest part of growing up isn't disappointing your parents. It's realizing they were never really listening to you in the first place. I don't regret leaving early. I regret not asking harder questions sooner. But I won't make that mistake again.